Well, here we are. Good morning. Good morning to our listening and viewing audience on Facebook Live. We'll also have this video posted on YouTube shortly after this broadcast. And we have with us a special guest this morning, our delegate to Congress, Stacey Plaskett.
Good morning.
Good morning, Stacey. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for taking time to be with us on a Sunday morning.
Yep.
But as we work for the people, that work is round the clock, right?
It is. It is. And, most of us are not in church anymore. So whether you are broadcasting your service or just having a cup of coffee now, this is a good time to be with AARP.
Great, thank you. Yes, and AARP, we are an amazing, if I may say so myself, amazing lobbying advocacy agency, and we're always seeking the good of those who are 50 years of age and older, and especially during this time of this great pandemic. There's so much concern and anxiety all over the world, and especially among our older population because they
Yeah,
are the most vulnerable.
right.
And it turns out that here in the Virgin Islands, most of the people who have died, unfortunately, are over the age of 50. Sad that anybody would die, but especially our more vulnerable population is being hit very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be remiss if I didn't extend my and AARP's deepest condolences to the families of those who have lost their lives to this pandemic.
Yes, we have been blessed in the Virgin Islands with not having as many fatalities as other locations, but every life lost is an important one. And we grieve with those families that have lost to the pandemic. And also those individuals, are deceased individuals during this time period, because we've been unable to have the kind of send off that we normally do in the Virgin Islands. And that compounds the loss as well.
Yes, and talking about the send-off that we normally give in the Virgin Islands, yes, we are a very loving, a very expressive community, a very expressive culture. And this time of this pandemic is so difficult for so many of us. We tend to want to hug and kiss and shake
Yes.
hands and of course, the guys like the dops and all of that. And we can't do that anymore with all of this social distancing. And
It, it's so funny because when in my Washington office, periodically will have someone come and be a part of our staff who has great Hill experience on Capitol Hill, but may not be from the Virgin Islands or familiar with our culture. And one of the first things we always have to acclimate them to is that, you must greet everybody as you come in. That when we get into larger gatherings, we will in fact hug one another, that is cultural and part of who we are.
Yep, and now we can't do that. And it was so hard for me to break myself out of that mold, right? Because it's just so natural to hug and kiss.
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm,
find myself like pulling myself back.
mm-hmm.
And at AARP, we really want to remind our older population that this pandemic is still raging. Please do remember to practice social distancing. Please remember, as our governor has mandated, that when we go out in public, especially when we go into places of business, to wear your mask.
Yes.
It's so very important. As time passes, it's normal for us to be lulled into a certain complacency.
Mm-hmm.
And we look around us and we say, well, okay, I'm still okay. My family is still okay, and we think it's okay to go back to our old ways. But no, I mean, this is still very present with us. So please do continue exercising precautions.
Definitely. Yes. I'm grateful that I'm beginning to see people wearing the mask more in the Virgin Islands. Unfortunately, we don't have as much of a walking culture as we used to. So, we are more in cars now, but I am beginning to see people wearing masks when they are going to business, or now, the new normal is people having it down here when they're walking, and then they'll lift it up when they go into a store. Yes, I have noted, however, that when I'm here in Washington, D.C., I am seeing it's very prevalent, as people are walking, to see them with masks on.
Yeah, yeah, and we're happy to see that all over the Virgin Islands. And
Hmm.
I remember when the pandemic first started up, I saw that a lot of older people were not sure. They were confused as I would see them in the supermarkets and so forth. And they would look at me or other people around like, "What are you doing? You know, why do you have that in your face? Why are you wearing gloves?" But even at AARP, we worked hard to get the word out, and so did our governor, of course, and all of our elected officials. And so now I see that older people are now using their masks, and
Yes,
they don't have
I
that
saw the
physically.
governor had the first day he had a really colorful, well crafted one. I have a couple of them that are, people have donated to me. I have my madras. I have an African print one, and thankfully they also have a little pocket. Ms. Shang had one with a little pocket, and I was able to put a cartridge, a filter in there. It's really very cool. I'm very
Yeah, yeah. I have some from Miss Shang.
fashionable.
You know, she's my cousin, and so she has supplied me with some of those too.
They're
And
really good. I know she was having some problems with getting the elastic, but I think that's been resolved.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. So jumping right into the topic of the day. There's been a lot of confusion and concern among these economic impact payments or these stimulus payments to people who are Social Security beneficiaries here in the Virgin Islands.
Mhm.
And at one point, our governor was telling people that they would have to go and file their 2018
Right.
taxes because the territories are being treated differently
Mhm.
from the rest of the states.
Well,
Uh,
can I just talk a little bit, because
Please
we
do.
have, I noticed that in the media and public, we spend a lot of attention on the stimulus checks, but there are so many other components of the CARES Act that I think that we need to give a lot of attention to that are really helping and have been helpful to people. For one, we have given funding to small businesses. And I think the banks in the Virgin Islands have done an amazing job because they have such close relationships with their clientele, that we have over 1,000 businesses in the Virgin Islands who've been able to receive support from the CARES Act. And in addition to that, unemployment has really just skyrocketed around the country. There are over 20 million Americans who are without work. And the governor has given us a number from the Department of Health of over 8,000 Virgin Islanders that from April have filed for unemployment, which is more than file in a 2-year period. And the Department of Labor has done an amazing job. The governor had people transferred over to the Department of Health to work on those claims. And so we're seeing a tremendous amount of claims in the Virgin Islands that are actually being taken care of, being approved, and people are getting the unemployment. The federal government, through the CARES Act, added $600 a week to an individual's unemployment benefit. And we believe that the purpose of that was to ensure that people had almost the same amount that they would have while they were working. And so that is, for the 13-week period that unemployment was extended into. And so, there are probably maybe AARP people who have small businesses who benefited from that, as well as those who are receiving that unemployment benefit. But of course, as you said, the stimulus check is the one that is giving people the most angst. It is a $1,200 check for an individual who has made 75,000 or less. If you are filing jointly, then it is 140,000 or 150,000 for a family, for joint filers. And if you're filing as head of house, it's 112,500. You will get the full 1,200, $500 for each child 17 and under. And then, there's a formula that goes below that for the stimulus checks. So you were saying that there was a concern about those filers who do not file with the Internal Revenue Bureau. I think that one of the basic things that we need to remember about the Virgin Islands and all of the territories is that our relationship with the federal government is that, as you remember, when you file taxes in the Virgin Islands, you do not file with IRS, and you file with the Internal Revenue Bureau. And the federal government has said, we will allow the Virgin Islands government, we will allow Puerto Rico, Northern Marianas, American Samoa, Guam to keep the funding that they would pay for federal taxes. We are allowing the governments of those territories to keep that money themselves. And that's why when there are these programs that the federal government is giving these tax credits, or that we will need a reimbursement for, or if they are giving stimulus checks like they are doing now, and like they did in 2008 under the Americans Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the ARA Act, that's why we have to get a reimbursement for the money that the federal government has said that they want to put out, because we file our taxes locally and not with the federal government.
Right. And then because of the way we file our taxes here and those monies coming here to be paid out by the local government, then came the issue of how does the local government know
Exactly.
who these Social Security beneficiaries are? I mean,
Right.
they have
So
no record.
how would they don't know who they are because they don't file taxes. And that also includes for people who are on public assistance, people who are receiving veterans benefits, but do not make sufficient funding to file taxes as well. Those are unknowns to our local Internal Revenue Bureau. And so how do they know who they are was the big question. Before the governments of the territories created their plan, all of the delegates from the territories, we've had more than one conversation with Treasury and with IRS, expressing our concerns over the rollout of this. And one, when would we get the money? Will it be a true reimbursement, meaning that we pay the money out and then we are reimbursed, which is what is the bare minimum that the law would require and would be helpful? Or will you get from our governments what that amount is, and will you give that money up front so that we can put that money out? And then how will we know who those individuals are? And ideally, the ideal would have been for that money to come directly from Treasury to Social Security, and Social Security pay those money to those individuals. But of course, there's a concern that we need to know who those people are. The local government needs to be aware of who those individuals are, and hence you have the agreement that was created.
Excellent. Yes. And so before we go further into some of the details, I would like to clarify, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I'm quite accurate, that our biggest concern was for these Social Security beneficiaries who were not obligated to file taxes locally because they're pretty much just living off of Social Security. And therefore, again, how would the governor know, or the government know who these people are? Because there are several people here in the Virgin Islands who receive Social Security but have other supplementary income, and they are already required to file annually. And they have already filed their 2018 taxes because they were required because of their level of income. So the local government already knows who those people are. But again, we're focusing here on the people who are not obligated to file. Therefore, the government has no knowledge of them being Social Security beneficiaries.
Exactly. For an example, I could be a retiree or I could be an elder. I don't have a pension, but potentially I have rental property as such that I have a sufficient income with my Social Security and those rental properties that I do have to file. Or I am a retiree and I'm getting a pension that is large enough with my Social Security that requires me to file. So the local government is aware of those type of individuals, but are unaware of those people who do not make enough outside of their Social Security check that they would meet the criteria or the threshold to have to file taxes.
Exactly. And so for purposes of this conversation going forward, then we are focusing on those individuals who were not required to file taxes. Therefore, the
Right.
government had no knowledge of them being Social Security beneficiaries.
They're under the
And
radar.
under legally under the radar. Legally under the radar. And so then there was this thing of then, well, how does the government know? How does the government get the money to them? And so then came this whole issue that they would have to file taxes locally. And that's when AARP became very, very, very concerned.
Mm-hmm.
We thought, well, we're in the middle of this pandemic again, and these are the most vulnerable people over the age of 63, and we're asking them to go out and file taxes, and a lot of them don't know how to begin doing it on their own. Some of them have
Sure.
to go and hire tax preparers to do it for
Exactly.
them, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Incurring unnecessary expense and the burden of coming out of their homes to actually file because we do not have electronic filing here in the Virgin Islands.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when AARP sprung into action and started speaking with you and with Governor Bryan, and both of you were very responsive to the call of AARP. We thank both of you for responding in this way, and then the ball sort of started rolling even faster, right? To get these people paid without having to file taxes. So can you tell me more about that now from your
Sure.
perspective?
I know that, the governor was very concerned and was reaching out in his conversations with the federal government, Treasury, IRS, even Social Security Administration, to see what could be done to obviate the need for individuals to have to do that, to have to go and file the 1040 or make these filings. And then the delegates as well were having conversations with IRS, Treasury, Social Security Administration also. But I think the greatest work was really done by AARP, and really working to ensure that their members in the territories and using your national office, Troy, to ensure that this was really advocated to Social Security Administration and Treasury to see if there was a way to fix this so that that information could come to the territories. Because also you have to remember that if, the governments of the territories, and if our governor puts out more money than it's supposed to, or people are getting paid twice, that's going to they're going to take that money away from us, rather than from those individuals. Treasury will then claw back from us at the end of the day after they've done an audit. So this was really necessary. And what the fix that came up, I think, is probably the second best solution to, and probably, I think, maybe the best solution, right? I mean, there was a hope that Social Security Administration through Treasury would pay out that money themselves. But I think it's important for the local governments to have the file on who these people are. Because at the end of the day, there are additional services and support that the local government could give those individuals, which we may not have known who they were prior to this.
Exactly, yes. And from our perspective at AARP, the minute I heard it being said that these Social Security beneficiaries would have to go and file taxes, I became very alarmed. And I called my colleague in Puerto Rico, the state director of Puerto Rico over there in AARP, and we had several conversations. Then we spoke with our regional vice president, and we worked all the way up to our senior vice president of government affairs in our national office, as you referenced. And then that senior vice president, Bill Sweeney, sent a letter to the commissioner of the Social Security Administration of the United States, and also had several conversations with federal IRS and the Federal Reserve, and started getting the ball rolling. To make a long story short, then the commissioner of the Social Security Administration sent a letter in response to our senior vice president of
Mhm.
government affairs, a very favorable letter. And then right after that, the web page of Social Security Administration was updated. they put out a big press release that now they were going to work closely with the local authorities and the territories to make sure that the Social Security beneficiaries receive those stimulus payments without having to file any extra paperwork.
Yep.
So it was a great win between AARP, you as our delegate to Congress, Governor Bryan, and his solicitude and wanting it to work out well for the people. And now we have a really great solution here. And the Social Security beneficiaries should be receiving their money starting very soon.
Right. I think it worked out really well. We are also now in the midst of negotiations for a second round of funding. And so we'll see where that goes. This Friday, the House passed legislation which would give an enormous amount of funding to local governments, provide support and fixes to some of the things that we thought were in the first bill, as well as a second round of stimulus funding to individual families also. One of the fixes that I think may affect some of your members is that in the first stimulus, we requested that if you had for homeowners, if you had a federally backed mortgage, you were able to get a forbearance for up to 6 months on that, on your mortgage payment. And all because we were silent on it, banks were saying yes, and the money becomes due immediately at the end of that forbearance. And we were like, whoa, that's not really the intention. You're not giving families support by doing that. And so in the what we're calling now the HEROES Act, for this next round of funding, my caucus in the House passed legislation which says that it needs to be put to the end of your mortgage payments. The forbearance needs to be put to the end so that you can have some relief during that time. That will, of course, that along with the other measures in the bill are up for tremendous negotiation in the next week or so. The Senate and the Senate leadership, they're on the Republican side, have said that they are not interested in passing legislation at this time, that they want to see what is the economic impact of the last CARES Act in the country. My side and the House, the Democratic caucus has said we would like to put a marker in the ground in terms of what we ideally want for the negotiation and then move from there. And so, the discussions will go on. We have been meeting. I can't tell you, Troy, how many Zoom, Microsoft Teams, conference calls I am on. Normally, just for a context, normally the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus meet once a week when we're in session for an hour. We are now meeting twice a week, and those sessions are 2 hours each. We also have our regular committee meetings, discussions, roundtables as well. The House also passed language that allows us to have remote voting and also to be able to subpoena remotely for remote hearings. In my committee that I chair, the subcommittee that I chair, biotech, horticulture, and research on the agriculture committee, I've really focused a lot of attention on food insecurity and the food supply, hearing from a lot of farmers, a lot of distributors, as well as to the grocery stores and the food banks about the problems of food insecurity in this country. And disproportionately, this is affecting our elders, and in particular, women of color who are elders. 60% of those over 65 who are women, so the women of color, 60% of those women of color over the age of 65 are in the 200% poverty level. And so that's a tremendous amount of women of color, our elder women, 65 and older, who already have large issues with regard to having food and having health. And with the problems with our food supply, I know that this is going to affect those women even more. Those are our mothers, our grandmothers, and we need to do what's necessary to ensure that they receive food during this time. We have issues of diabetes, hypertension, poor health before the COVID virus. And so those compounded with food insecurities make them even more vulnerable than they were before. And so that's something that I've really taken on. It is a real burden for me throughout this country to try and find out what we can do to make sure that that's done. In the Farm Bill of 2018, we're like, the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill not only deals with farmers, but also deals with nutrition. There was a marriage between farmers and crop insurance and nutrition many years ago to ensure that we could create bipartisan farm bills between those liberals and urban areas and rural areas. The urban areas that rely on nutrition programs and the farmers in rural areas. And in the last Farm Bill, we gave a tremendous amount of money to the USDA to stand up a distribution channel so that they could ensure that in times of crisis, food could be gotten, food could be shipped and trucked and go to the areas most in need. Unfortunately, they did not take that on. While they had the funding for it, it wasn't built out. And we're seeing the effects now. So I've had a number of conversations with Secretary Perdue, the Secretary of Agriculture, along with committee members to really give them a push to try and do that. Because without healthy food, we know that people's health is even more at risk and puts people in very tenuous situations when we're dealing with this pandemic. I know that my husband and my kids are probably sick of the amount of smoothies that I give them, right? Trying to boost their immune system. I have not only turmeric, fresh turmeric from home, I have garlic and everything elderberry, whatever, one of my staffers, Laverne Joseph, in my Frederickstead office, we call her affectionately the chemist. She's read remember the book Back to Eden and all the other books on
Yes.
healthcare. And so, she'll tell us what kind of oils and roots and supplements that we need. And, I grind that up and I just squeeze out a whole bunch of honey in there and maybe put some berries and watch them drink it every day.
Right. Listen, there's so much that we have to talk about, and we're almost out of time. But I wanted to answer just one question. I'm looking here at some comments, and this lady says that she's on disability. Will this apply to her also? So can you talk about people who are receiving disability benefits from Social Security?
Sure, that will apply to them as well. Every American is receiving a check if you meet the income criteria. The question is, how do you receive it, and the mechanisms we need to put in place to ensure that you get what you need to keep yourselves going during this time. So yes, you will receive a check if you are on disability and receiving Social Security. That information is now going to the Virgin Islands government, and the Virgin Islands government are processing along with the other checks to ensure that you get that funding.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Stacey. And again, we just want everybody in the Virgin Islands to know that AARP is at work for them, and our delegate to Congress, Stacey Plaskett, is at work, and we're making great inroads. And we look forward to hearing from our governor tomorrow, and we look forward to the people of the Virgin Islands who are on Social Security receiving these payments. And again, we'd like to have you on in the future.
Sure, thank you. But Troy, I just want to thank you for your advocacy, and Ms. Toussaint, who has reached out to me, texting, calling. We've met with you all. You really are fighting for those members at AARP And even those who are not members, who are within your cohort and that special interest group, I want to thank you for your work. And I still need to get my AARP card and become
Don't
a
have
voter.
it yet?
I don't, and I need it. I know my chief of staff, Angeline Jabbar, is always holding hers up, and my communications director, Mike McQuarrie, just had the big 50 birthday, so he can now be an AARP member also. Yes, Mike, I'm putting you out there, putting your business on the street, but it's a blessing to be able to have reached this age, have the wisdom, have my health and strength, and be able to be an AARP member.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's a real honor for me to work for AARP. It's such a blessing to be able to work for this great organization and make an impact for people right here in the Virgin Islands. You know,
Your president is awesome. She is on the Hill. She is working hard. It's amazing to see a woman of color in that position, really fighting for those of us who have reached that age of maturity.
Yes, our CEO, Joanne Jenkins. And also, I want to thank my local team, as we mentioned just now, Pamela Toussaint, who is our Associate State Director of Advocacy and Community Outreach, as well as Noemi Garcia, our Associate State Director of Communications and Community Outreach, and our Senior Operations Specialist, Sherilyn Poxon, all right here in the Virgin Islands working
And you've
hard
got a
for
great
people.
board.
Yes, yes, and your aunt Corinne Plaskett, she's our volunteer
I brought
president.
out your board.
That's right. Yes, and also our national board member Alicia Watlington Georges. She's in our national governing board of AARP, and she's a St. Thomian, Watlington from St. Thomas.
Excellent. That's awesome.
Yeah, so again, thank you, Stacey. We look forward to having you on for another conversation in the near future. We have so much to talk about, and we have so much to learn from you. And thank you for all the good work you do for the people of the Virgin Islands.
Thank you. Have a blessed Sunday.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.